Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is gone. Brian Flores is here to stay, and there's a new intriguing assistant coach entering TCO. Let's get into the vibe. Welcome to the Vibe of the Vikings, the Minnesota Vikings football podcast. We catch the real feel of Vikings football. I'm your host, Josh Kolodziejski, with you on a beautiful Wednesday night, coming from the warm state of Arizona. A lot of snow, a lot of cold has been going on up there in Minnesota. But down here, we are nice and comfortable, and we have given ourselves some time to think about some recent Vikings news. We have calmed ourselves. We have given ourselves some balance as we talk about a couple of things in tonight's episode. And the first of those, obviously, is going to be about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, but we've also got some coaching staff changes as well as a little poem for the quarterbacks that are in the Super Bowl, both of which in some way or another have Minnesota ties. That's Sam Darnold, of course, and Drake Maye, but we will get to that part at the end of tonight's show. First, we got to talk about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, because last Friday, all of a sudden, right after the Twins fired Derek Falvey, their president of baseball operations, the Wilfs announce that no longer leading the Vikings roster building process is Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. He's gone. He has been fired. And honestly, it's probably the right call. And I think I even talked about it on the first show, that I get the case that you can make for keeping him. I would prefer to have him gone, but I can give him another year. And then the weeks started coming, and they kept on coming. Back to the rules, and he hit the ground running, and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is still with the team at TCO. And so I think we all assumed that that was going to stay the case, and that he was going to be given one more chance, one more draft, and one more off-season period to see if he could put a competent football team around J.J. McCarthy, or if it would be J.J. McCarthy or someone else entirely. The timing of it was weird because Sam Darnold gets to the Super Bowl. Drake Maye, who there were rumors all over the place that the Vikings were very interested in bringing and trading up for, and some rumors in some places that both sides thought that they had a deal done until the day of the draft, it's also in the Super Bowl. Did Kwesi get cold feet in that scenario? And the fact that these two quarterbacks are going up against one another, is that reason enough to fire him? I think that would be more of a reactionary take, and I think overall it would lead me to question the decision-making at the very top if something like that is the tipping point. Hopefully it would be the straw that breaks the camel's back and not the whole pile of straws all in one. It's just the final one. So Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's gone. It is absolutely deserved for a couple of reasons, but it's also, as we've all heard the stories over the past week, some of those stories, it's not deserved. So we'll talk about everything. And from a football asset management standpoint, 100%, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has been one of the worst general managers in the NFL over the last 4 years. Doesn't help that he comes from the Andrew Berry school, who actually had a pretty good draft, but makes questionable decisions, including bringing in Deshaun Watson. I think maybe if that Deshaun Watson trade, if we just let the GM market cook for a little bit, like it seems like we're going to right now in 2022, I think we see, Andrew Berry just traded for Deshaun Watson. Maybe we rule out anyone from that insane Cleveland building. But as it was, we had to hire our GM quick because then we wanted to hire a head coach. And we brought in Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. There's a honeymoon period. I think a lot of folks, including myself, liked that it was an analytics guy from an analytics background, but then you quickly find out that that is not football analytics specifically, and that when we say analytics background, or when the Vikings PR and communications team said that he comes from an analytics background. It was from Wall Street. It was asset management on Wall Street, which obviously is going to have some similar concepts, but is completely different from asset management at the NFL level. And we quickly learned that in the 2022 NFL draft, where you go at pick number 12. And we've learned, some people are saying that it's just been learned that Jameson Williams was the pick, but for like the last year and a half at least, like Matthew Collar and some other beat writers have said that it was always going to be Jameson Williams. So this was not something that we uncovered this past week during all of this stuff that has come out from the Kwesi Adofo-Mensah hirings. The Vikings, if they could not find a trade partner, were going to draft a wide receiver, and that wide receiver was going to be Jameson Williams. It was not going to be Kyle Hamilton at safety. But instead, we let the player that we most wanted at that position go at that pick go to a division rival by trading 20 spots down and not even really milking it. I think there was a second-round pick swap in there, and we got some like third-round, fourth-round capital as well. But by and large, it was a disastrous move. And maybe the trade charts that everyone goes off of when looking for trade value in the draft, maybe those might have aligned in that case. But I think you're failing to take into consideration, or those trade charts are failing to take into consideration giving a division rival, albeit at that point a pretty bad one, the player of their choosing and the player even of your choosing. And there's no way to know 100% if Kwesi, there would have been no way for him to know that they were coming up for Jameson Williams unless he asks. And kind of got fleeced. And I think he felt like he did the fleecing, and that was when the doubts kind of started to creep in. And instead of drafting Jameson Williams, who, by the way, just had his first 1,000-yard season, they drafted Lewis Seen, who has now bounced around the NFL, and I think just got cut by a United Football League team. And right there, it's like, okay, can we start to trust him? And if we are going to be questioning him as fans at this point, there's probably some folks in the Vikings organization that are also starting to question him. And that's when I think you started to get these rumors that we're going to talk about in just a moment. But a bad 2022 draft. He fires the scouting staff. Most of the scouting staff had been holdovers from the Spielman regime, and he just didn't want to have to rework it. So maybe you give him a clean slate there and say, okay, you bring in your guys. You're clearly not a football guy. But then in the 2024 draft, I think this is when you probably could have fired him if the timing wouldn't have made the first round of the draft look completely terrible. And it's not from the players that he selected, but it's how we got there. Minnesota had the 11th overall pick, and then they traded up, gave up more assets than it was worth to move up one spot to select J.J. McCarthy when he was going to be there anyway. Maybe the Raiders were talking with the Jets, or maybe the Jets convinced the Vikings that the Raiders were talking to them, or that the Broncos were talking to them. But you're still giving up far more, and you're getting fleeced. And then you had gone up from the second round to the first round in order to make a lucrative offer for Drake May with the Patriots at number 3, and lost value in that trade up into the first round. And then on draft night, you traded higher up even still and lost more value there. And that is by the trade charts. That is, whereas the 2022, I'm not exactly sure. We know for a fact that he lost a ton of value making moves to trade up in 2024. And so that was concerning, and that's when I think you could say, okay, regardless of who he had chosen, before we even saw these guys on the field, maybe before the second round starts, we get this guy out of the building. And so from that angle, to me, it was certainly a deserved firing that makes a lot of sense. Timing's still askew, but you see why they would get him out of there, because he is constantly overpaying for marginal moves and then gets cold feet when he has the opportunity to overpay for a major move. And now 2 of these would have resulted in completely different directions of this franchise. But let's just talk about them. 2023. It's rumored that the Minnesota Vikings wanted to go up and trade with the Arizona Cardinals at pick 3 in order to select Anthony Richardson, who Kevin O'Connell really, really liked, and how we've heard from NFL film stuff really, really likes. And he might make his way over here in a trade this offseason for much less capital than he would have given up there. But the fact of the matter is, your head coach liked this guy. You had the opportunity, and it would have been a hefty cost. It would have been 3 first-rounders plus a little extra change to get up there. Your head coach really wants him. I think whether or not you currently believe in Anthony Richardson, I think if he's with the Vikings, things very possibly, very really could go in a completely different direction. Head coach is pounding the table for him. You decide not to trade up with Arizona. Arizona also got a good deal with Houston, so there is that. Houston was not, with their second first-round pick, was not as far back as Minnesota was. And so they could still draft their guy, even if it wasn't as much value. Arizona did trade down. Houston trades up, and then Indianapolis takes Anthony Richardson with pick 4. But cold feet trading up there. We mentioned cold feet trading up for Drake Maye, and you might think, well, maybe he wasn't actually available. But then when you go and you look at the Hard Knocks episode from the offseason that featured the New York Giants, on draft day, there is a phone call between Joe Schoen of the New York Giants and I think it was Elliot Wolf of the New England Patriots. And Wolf tells Shane's just checking in to see when they're on the clock, how much would it cost for us to get up there to get a quarterback? And Elliot Wolf says it would probably take a first rounder and a second rounder this year, and then a first round next year, and then maybe like a third rounder. And then he backtracks and said, okay, well, maybe not that. Maybe not something crazy like that, but something like that. So that was in the Patriots' mind. First of all, they were willing to, because they had opened up that door with the Giants, who, yes, were at pick 6, but we were at pick 11. So it's not a super long drop, and J.J. McCarthy, as we saw, would be there at 11 for them, and that was the guy that the Patriots also liked if they were going to trade down. So he was indeed for sale. The reports leading up to that for the last month were true, that the Vikings kind of had that handshake agreement, and the overpay that Elliot Wolf wanted the Giants to pay before backtracking on it and saying, okay, maybe that's a little bit crazy of an ask, was 2 first-rounders, a second-rounder, and a third-rounder. We had 2 first-rounders in that draft alone. We had a first-rounder the next year, and I sure as hell would have been fine giving up a 2026 first-rounder if it meant going up to get the guy that Kevin O'Connell wanted. You want the 4 first-round picks? We will make sure that we give all of them to you. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, in this instance, but in a few minutes later, as we saw, trading up 1 spot for J.J. McCarthy, in this instance, did not go up to go get Drake Maye. And then this year, I don't know if there was any discussion about moving up a spot or 2 in the 3rd round, but the rumor was that the Vikings, as they saw Xavier Watts kept falling, a safety who led rookies in takeaways this year with 5 interceptions and a couple of forced fumbles. They saw Watts was falling, and that was the guy that they had their eyes on if he somehow miraculously got to him at 97. The thing is, you can move up to get him at number 97. Move up 3 spots, and the value that you're giving up to go from 97 to 94 is like equivalent of a 6th-round pick, which we had. Now, we didn't have a lot of draft capital within this draft. I think we only had 4 or 5 picks. Part of that goes back to overpaying in the Dallas Turner and J.J. McCarthy picks. And so Kwesi, in this case, just decides, okay, I'm going to play it passively. I'm going to wait for Xavier Watts, who they thought would be a franchise-changing player, potentially on defense. We're going to just wait for that guy to fall to us. And what happens? The pick before, the Atlanta Falcons trade up with Philadelphia and take Xavier Watts. So we trade down and we get Ty Felton. And you say, well, we had the draft picks. Or we didn't have enough draft picks. We wanted to have more guys later in the draft. Well, the guys we got later in the draft were Gavin Bartholomew, who has not seen a snap, and Kobe King. You trust Kwesi Adofo-Mensah enough with late-round drafting ability, not even considering first-round drafting ability, but late-round drafting ability? I mean, I think we saw the case right there. Bartholomew, who's injured all year, and Kobe King, who was cut less than halfway through the season, despite Blake Cashman being injured for a little bit and having that linebacker spot potentially open for at least an active roster spot every Sunday for depth. Or Ty Felton, who was the third rounder that they took anyway, and he never saw the field in any meaningful offensive snaps, had some moments on special teams. All that, it shows me, yes, that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah had this coming. Because when you brought him in, you knew this was not a guy that was around the game of football. This was not a guy that came from a scouting perspective. When it came to evaluating football talent at the amateur college level, at the NFL level, that is not his background. So the thought process with bringing in that analytics guy without the scouting background is you also have a football guy. In this case, it was Ryan Grigson, and then also Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores. They are evaluating the talent. They are giving their evaluations to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is trying to quantify players based on the evaluations that he is given by those football guys. And so you probably didn't set him up for success by giving him Ryan Grigson for a little bit, the guy who traded a first-round pick for Trent Richardson at one point in his NFL career, who by the way, is still in the building. Is still at TCO for some reason. He probably should have also been gone with Kwesi. That should have probably been like a package deal because those two guys kind of worked in tandem for together. So hopefully Grigson is on the way out soon. So he gets the information, he quantifies it, and then utilizes how that value translates in free agency, how that value translates in the draft. And he wasn't good at that. You have less on your plate than a lot of other general managers because, we're trying to give you time to quantify unquantifiable things, which is an experience you don't really have. You have it at Wall Street, but you don't have it in the NFL with NFL players. You have it with stocks and portfolios and 401ks, things that are much more concrete, more rules oriented, whereas a football player, there's a lot more variables that go into deciding how valuable a player is and projecting him into the future. And you could not do it. So yeah, he's gone. Adios, Kwesi. We will not miss you. It's also worth noting that in the Wide Left article that Arif Hassan did, which is really good, and you should check it out over on his the Wide Left Substack, it mentioned that, in fact, actual analytics people from around the league viewed Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's label of an analytics guy and scoffed and called him privately a clown. Like, you call yourself a data analytics guy, but you're actually not. Or at least you're not beholden to most of our analytics rules. So what are you then? And honestly, it almost seems like the Vikings just got scammed for 4 years. And it was also about how he was a very arrogant person to work with or to be in communication with, that he put on a sort of humble persona when the cameras were on, when he knew the cameras were on, and then was kind of a dick when they were off. So he wanted to sell one side of himself and was a little bit two-faced. So I think two things can be true. He deserved to be fired, and yet the way in which the whole firing went down, in the weak sense, everything else points to this Vikings culture as a whole being completely, utterly toxic, and gives me a lot of cause for concern for this front office. let's just go back here, because when Rick Spielman and Mike Zimmer were first fired, the ownership group, led by the Wilfs, said that they were looking for a culture of collaboration. I don't know if those were the exact words, but collaboration was used a lot, and culture was used a lot, because it had gotten so toxic between Spielman, the front office, and Mike Zimmer and the coaching staff. And yet, you still have one of those guys in the building, Rob Brzezinski, from the Spielman era. Oh, yeah, well, he is a good cap guy. Everybody in the NFL has a good cap guy. There is nothing that makes Rob Brzezinski's ability to rework contracts any more special than anybody else. Every NFL team has their Rob Brzezinski. And if you are so concerned about a toxic culture, then get rid of one of the guys that was a part of that toxic culture. Don't let him stay around the building. It's a half measure. Well, maybe he's not toxic. Oh, yeah, well, in Matthew Collier's article, he illustrates how Rob Brzezinski really wanted to get Adam Thielen here. So he goes behind Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's back earlier in this offseason during training camp and orchestrates a trade and basically stages a coup in order to get Adam Thielen, who was terrible, who didn't fit on this team anymore, who was wide receiver 4, and you're giving up a 4th and 5th round pick swap. And that was Rob Brzezinski's call. And he did it by going behind leadership's back. And yet that toxicity is still in the building. And then you've got team sources all going to the Athletic people like Alec Lewis and Diana Rossini, who apparently have known about all of this stuff for months, but just, wait to info dump it all onto us. Like, what's the point of being a reporter? And don't call yourselves reporters, but what's the point of being a reporter and having that access if you're not going to use that access in a moment that is useful, which is beforehand? Like, yeah, thanks. You told us all of this after the fact. You're not giving us news. You're just kind of adding some color to it, but you're not doing reporting. You're doing PR for your sources. But we got to keep our access. But you're not doing anything with your access. You're not doing anything journalistic with your access. So maybe kind of rethink how important that access is if all the information that we get is information that we now know because Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was fired. Oh, yeah, we know that he was bad at his job because they fired him. And then there's an article, hey, Kwesi was bad at his job. And we say, yeah, they fired him. That makes sense. Thanks for this report. Here's $50,000. So that is kind of an aside, but going off of that, they're getting stuff from league circles about how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is viewed in league circles. And it's a roundabout way of saying that also people in the building didn't like him. So even if these are league circles that don't include many members of the Vikings, where are they getting information from what's going on within the building from? Maybe the reporters are getting it firsthand from these league circles, but these league circles are getting that information from the building. So it's just secondhand information from the Minnesota Vikings. It's only one level of a telephone game call. And within these league circles that, again, originate within whispers of the Vikings facility, make no doubt about that, we get this paternity leave bullshit. And it is kind of just proving how bad the toxic culture of the NFL is as a whole, because the reports by Rossini and by Alec Lewis and by The Athletic were that a lot of people around the league, again, remember, a lot of people in the building, kind of were puzzled at what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did, taking 2 weeks off for paternity leave during training camp. And then you've got these offensive lineman types and people on the internet saying, oh, that does not fly in the NFL culture. That's completely understandable that you would fire a guy. This is them thinking, or at least assuming, that he was fired at least in part because of this 2-week parental leave, which was not the case. That's not why he was fired. He was fired because he was bad at his job. Him taking 2 weeks off is just a character assassination from the people in the building, bad-mouthing him on his way out of the door. So that's the kind of leaders that you're getting. You're getting this Mean Girls gossip table going on right now. So you agree? You like J.J. McCarthy? That's the kind of thing. That was a terrible Rachel McAdams impression by me. But that's the sort of thing. So you agree. You like this, Kwesi. So you agree. You think you deserve 2 weeks off. Like, that's all I think when I hear about these league circle stuff. And people around the league, and we've got other former NFL people saying that, yeah, that doesn't fly, taking 2 weeks off during training camp. Why? Why doesn't it fly if you're the general manager who is not really scouting focused, who doesn't get the information, the analysis on the players firsthand, who is letting more often than not the coaching staff decide who is being cut or not? And maybe he has some say in terms of, well, the contract is this, contract is that. We want to be able to keep certain assets here. And maybe he has final say in that way. But he's still working remotely during this 2-week paternity leave. He's not just completely in absentia. He's there in a computer getting information from Kevin O'Connell, from Ryan Grigson. Is like, okay, here are the guys that did well in today's practice. Like, come on. And then it's just like Will Compton and Taylor Lewan and Jeremiah Searles all saying, you know, we got to play football today. We can't be with our wives. We can't be with our kids. There's football. We got to play football with each other. And then that kind of just reveals the toxic culture of the NFL. But how that relates specifically to the toxic culture of the building is that plenty of Minnesota Vikings members of the coaching staff and front office did not like Kwesi Adofo-Mensah taking those 2 weeks off. So much so that now 3 years later, they are, after his termination, shouting it out to all of the media members, whoever can hear it, and kind of just like beating a dead horse that doesn't really need to be beat. And that is where our culture is here in Minnesota, folks. The culture of collaboration, if it ever was here after the Zimmer-Spielman era, is now gone, and we are just at that same place as we were post-2021. And that's not a pretty place to be. But the good news is we got Brian Flores back. So, we had talked about how he had signed his deal to become the defensive coordinator with Minnesota, barring any head coaching positions potentially calling his name. All 10 vacancies have been filled. None of them have the name Brian Flores attached at head coach. So as we said throughout, didn't get fooled by the agent reporting here on Vibe of the Vikings, that Brian Flores, if he was going to be defensive coordinator, would be a defensive coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings. And what do you know? That's exactly how it played out. So good for us in being smart and recognizing that. That is fantastic. He's going to be here. He is secured. He's going to be here for a while. He's going to make $6 million a year. I don't care how much. Pay him $20 million a year. That's the Wilfs money. I don't know. I don't know why it's important whether he's the highest paid defensive coordinator or not for us, because it doesn't go against salary cap and all of that. A guy who is not coming back, though, is Daronte Jones, who was their defensive backs coach, and he's going to become the defensive coordinator of the Washington Commanders. He was also a defensive passing game coordinator. But, I mean, knowing Brian Flores, his fingerprints were probably, overlapping Daronte Jones's fingerprints. I don't know how much of defensive pass game coordinating Daronte Jones actually did on game day. I think everything is really in the image that Brian Flores wants it to be on that defense, and he has a lot of leeway in that and a lot of control over that. One, because Daronte Jones is not a Brian Flores guy. He was originally brought in with the Minnesota Vikings in 2020. 2020 is also the year where our cornerbacks significantly fell off, and a lot of that was personnel. Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander good at the time, all hitting free agency at the same year and leaving us in kind of a sore spot for the next couple of years. But if you have a competent cornerbacks coach, maybe at least some of those guys can be developed. And so you draft Jeff Gladney in the first round, and you bring in Cam Dantzler later on, or Holton Hill. Some of these guys that were falling because of character issues that still had a good athletic base to start with. And you're hoping, even with these late round guys, that maybe one of them will be able to turn into something more than what any of them turn into. Caleb Evans, another one. And then in 2021, he's gone, but he comes back in 2022 under, again, not Brian Flores, Ed Donatel. So he's now worked under Mike Zimmer and whoever his figurehead defensive coordinator was, and now he's worked out under Ed Donatel, not Brian Flores' guy. And the thing is, every cornerback that we have had that has come in since 2020 that has been competent and not a total disaster has been out of the organization players. Stephon Gilmore, Byron Murphy. Those guys are free agents and trades. Patrick Peterson. So, I mean, you could even say like Bashad Breeland was terrible. And I guess his time didn't overlap with Daronte Jones because he was only here for a year. So never mind that. But any sort of competent play that we got was from someone who had been developed elsewhere. Daronte Jones, during his time here, did not really develop a single defensive back into a good player. The argument could be made that, well, he didn't really have much to work with in the cabinet. And then I would say that some play by some players this year around the league on other instances kind of shows that, oh, maybe he did have a little bit more talent than we thought, and he just wasn't able to properly utilize it. And Nahshon Wright is a Pro Bowler, and we can debate whether that word means anything anymore when Shedeur Sanders is a Pro Bowler and Joe Flacco is a Pro Bowler. But regardless, Nahshon Wright had a good season at cornerback and was kind of the de facto full season cornerback one. I mean, obviously, when like Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon were healthy, they were in those games the cornerback one, but the overarching throughout the season cornerback one of the Chicago Bears was Nahshon Wright. Reddy Stewart, who was in training camp with the Vikings this offseason, and we cut him on cutdown day, went to Dallas and was their starting nickel cornerback for a lot of the year and did not play terribly. Like, played better than some of these guys that we mentioned that were here under Daronte Jones. Mekhi Blackmon was used more sparingly, but still had a decent season playing both inside and outside whenever he was used for Indianapolis. He was not a total disaster, as he kind of had been in preseason post-knee injury. And Mekhi Blackmon was like the first guy that it was like, okay, maybe Daronte Jones has a chance to develop this player into something, and then he tears his ACL. So we'll never actually know. But all of this to say that I don't think Daronte Jones is going to be a major loss. And now we've brought in a Steelers defensive coordinator or defensive backs coach, Gerald Alexander. This is a Flores guy. He's worked with him in Miami, worked with him in Pittsburgh. This is a Flores guy, so that is something that I think we can be excited about, is Gerald Alexander as our next defensive backs coach. Another guy that is coming in that I think is another guy that we should be sneakily excited for is Frank Smith. And Frank Smith is coming over from Miami and from Coach Mike McDaniel's staff. He's going to be our assistant head coach. He was the offensive coordinator for Mike McDaniel, so yes, Mike McDaniel being an offensive guy negates some of what Frank Smith does, but a lot of the reporting has been that Frank Smith played a major role in the development of the run concept system in Miami, the design of the run game. He is the architect, or at least co-architect. It wasn't just Mike McDaniel building that. So me, who as soon as Mike McDaniel was fired, wanted him to be in our building as an offensive coordinator. He ended up going to Los Angeles. But to me, Frank Smith might be the next best thing, having him in the building. And if you just go back and look at some of the long Devon Chan runs and just watch some Miami Dolphins games when you're bored, I don't know why you would do that. Maybe you're just into being a masochist. But if you want to, take a look and see some of these motions and some of these formations. It is very, very diverse. A lot of two-back sets, a lot of two-backs, two tight end sets. And then you have one running back lined out as a wide receiver, and you enter him into the backfield, and you exit another one out. And it's doing a couple of things with all of these motions. There's like 4 or 5 motions before a lot of these big runs. And one, it's kind of untangling the defense a little bit. They're in knots, trying not to let you see what they are, but now you're moving everybody every which way, and you're kind of getting a clear picture and moving through the fog, as it were. And then the other thing you're trying to do is with all those motions is you want to catch the linebackers, the second line of defense, peeking into the backfield a little bit more, because if you can do that and there's some misdirection, there are only so many actual run plays without the dressing. But when you have all that dressing, you're trying to get them looking into the backfield as they naturally might be wont to do. And then by the time the ball is snapped and by the time your running back has taken the first few steps, they are a step behind. And that step behind can be so critical if your offensive linemen are able to climb and get to the correct angle. And then you have a much bigger hole to work with. So I think pairing that running game up with the Kevin O'Connell system that likes to take the top off of defenses and go deep down the field and target intermediate middle areas of the field, I think that will take a lot off the plate of J.J. McCarthy, make his job easier, or whoever our quarterback is next year. And I think the Vikings can have a really good offense with Frank Smith having a hand in the design of it. So good on the Vikings for getting him. They also got Keith Carter. For some reason, people don't like Keith Carter a ton. By the way, Jeff Stoutland of the Philadelphia Eagles decided to leave the Eagles because he doesn't like Sean Mannion's system. So, Jeff Stoutland, come on by. I'll say I don't like Keith Carter either. I don't know much about him. I think some former players didn't really like him, but he had success in the places where he was at. Titans 2018 to 2022, Jets 2023 to 2024. But Jeff Stoutland the Wilfs will write you a blank check and put whatever number you want down there. It's not my money. So I would love to have that. But I think Keith Carter, if Jeff Stoutland doesn't miraculously come here, Keith Carter is going to be fine. I think we are blowing things out of proportion a little bit. The Jets running game in 2023 and 2024 was very good. The Titans, although they had Derrick Henry, had a decent offensive line during those times and got the most out of their offensive line. I remember watching the 2020 Titans while I was doing another podcast just to get an idea of how good they were. And the offensive line was filled with kind of more unknown players, but it was I remember thinking the 2020 Titans, that offense, at least in the early parts of that season, is exactly what Mike Zimmer wanted to have. I think he looked at the Tennessee Titans offensive line and said, that's what I need. Okay, well, now we have the Keith Carter, the offensive line coach of those 2020 Titans. So hopefully that's the guy that Kevin O'Connell would like. So that is all of the coaching staff moves, the front office moves. Not a whole lot of player movement, obviously, yet. That'll get into later in the year. But coming up in just a few days is the Super Bowl. And I think this involves the Vikings and can be connected to the Vikings for the obvious reasons, because there have not been 2 quarterbacks in the same Super Bowl, 3 if you count Josh Dobbs, more connected to Minnesota football since the 2002-2003 Super Bowl between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Oakland Raiders. And you might remember that one was between Rich Gannon and Brad Johnson, who were both quarterbacks in Minnesota at the same time. Even Brad Johnson was Rich Gannon's backup, and I think even Rich Gannon backed up Brad Johnson for a little bit. So they spent time together in Minnesota, and then 7 to 10 years later are going up against one another in the Super Bowl, and it was kind of hard to watch. And then you watched them play, and I was like, oh, okay, that's why we got rid of him. Rich Gannon threw 5 interceptions in the game, and Brad Johnson relied on the Tampa Bay defense. He threw a couple of touchdown passes, including to our guy, Keenan McCardle, but by and large, the quarterback play in that Super Bowl was less than extraordinary. It wasn't anything to write home about. Even so, it still hurt as a Vikings fan in 2002 to see 2 former Minnesota Vikings quarterbacks have a chance at the title, and neither of them being on the Minnesota Vikings. We are left home from the dance. So that was always something that ate at me there, and I was like, okay, if something like that ever happens again, it's going to be very, very tragic once again. And now we have gotten that here in the 2025 NFL season, where it's Sam Darnold, who was our quarterback last year, going up against Drake Maye, who was never our quarterback, but if you listen to most reports, had a really good chance of being our quarterback if we had not, with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, gotten the coldest feet imaginable. So in order to honor that wonderful, wonderful tradition of Vikings quarterbacks having a chance for major success in the Super Bowl without the Vikings, I prepared a love letter to read and to close the show with. To the wistful lovers of my past. My dearest Sam, oh, how the fjords of my heart still echo with your name. We had something real, didn't we? You came into my life like a wandering warrior from distant lands, New York, North Carolina, San Francisco. The list longer than a Minnesota winter. And for one magical season, you lit up my heart like 1,000 purple fireworks. 35 touchdowns, 14 wins, and that glorious smile after every dime you dropped. We were in love. Deep, committed, let's build a future together love. But then I got scared. And I drove you away. Because I couldn't commit. Because lust for a younger match overtook me. It's not you, it's me. I have eyes on another. Cold. Heartless on my part. A classic breakup move. And now, here you are. Leading your new partner to the doorstep of immortality. I should have known that you had it in you. That you always had it in you. You're out there slinging it with swagger, making love look easy, and probably wondering why we ever let you go. Well, I don't think you think of it very much at all anymore. Well, do you think of me still? Do I linger on your heart like you linger on mine? Sam, if you're still reading this letter, I miss you. We miss you. Steadily. Painfully. Is it enough to even say, I'm sorry? Would anything that I do ever get you to come back? No. No, I wouldn't think so. So go put that ring on your finger. And make me regret every second, every foolish second that I doubted that you were the one. And just know that you'll always be the one who got away. And then there's you, Drake. My soulmate, who was out of my life before we even danced. 2024. We saw each other from across the hall. My mouth was agape. And maybe it was pity for seeing me like that. Pity that brought that slight smile to your face a split second before we averted our gaze from one another. I could write for millennia and never be able to encapsulate you, my perfect match, the strong arms, the pocket presence, that New England pedigree glow. We could have traded up. I could have called your name. I could have asked you to the glorious prom in purple. For a split second, I thought that you had beckoned me, but I got cold feet. I panicked, and I stayed in the 11th corner and watched helplessly as someone else extinguished the ardent flames in my heart just as quickly as they had ignited. Pat the Patriot. They took you home and knew exactly what they were getting. And look at you now. Pro Bowl MVP candidate, carrying Pat back to the Super Bowl in just your second year. I missed out, and I have no one to blame but myself. Drake, if only I had the guts to go up to you. And I think about that all the time. Maybe you'd be in Santa Clara with me right now. And I wouldn't be dancing on my own with a plate of hot dish and regret. You would have been my Norse god. Instead, you're out there making magic for Bill Belichick's old squad, and honestly, good for you. You deserve to have one that didn't shy away from you like we did. So shine bright, throw lasers, go win it all if you can, and just know that that one intense glance we shared will never leave my mind, even if our paths never cross again. So tonight, as the Super Bowl looms soon on Sunday, Sam and Drake, the ex we dumped and the one who was swept away from us, raising a horn of mead to both of you. You deserved better from me. You deserved better from the Vikings, from us. We fumbled the bag twice. But I'm glad you're both thriving. Truly, truly I am. I just wish that it could have been here. We love you. And I hate that we love you. Skol to the what ifs, and may the best quarterback win on Super Bowl Sunday. Forever your almosts, the Minnesota Vikings, and this heartbroken podcast host. Come back next week. This has been Vibe of the Vikings. Thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you next time. Skol.